The Sackler family made $13 billion destroying American lives with OxyContin. Over 500,000 Americans died in the opioid crisis they helped engineer. Purdue Pharma pushed pills they knew were addictive, manipulated doctors, and watched the bodies pile up. When the lawsuits finally came, they walked away billionaires. But 180 years earlier, another family did the exact same thing. Except their operation was 10 times larger, lasted 3 generations, and destroyed not just communities, but an entire empire of 400 million people. They didn't go to prison. They got knighthoods. Their drug money built hospitals, libraries, and universities that still bear their name today. History calls them merchant princes and generous philanthropists. This is the story of how the greatest drug empire in history became a dynasty celebrated as heroes. This is the Sassoon family, and this is how they got away with it. Baghdad, 1828. David Sassoon is not born into wealth. He's the son of a chief treasurer to a Turkish pasha in Baghdad, but when his father loses political favor, the family faces arrest. They flee with their lives, but little else. David arrives in Bombay in 1832 with connections, linguistic skills, and timing, but no fortune. What he walks into is an economic system already primed for industrial-scale crime. The British East India Company's monopoly on the India-China trade. Here's what David Sassoon understands immediately. Britain is desperate. They're hemorrhaging silver to China for tea, silk, and porcelain, products British society has become addicted to. By the 1830s, Britain's trade deficit with China has reached catastrophic levels, 21 million silver dollars flowing out annually. The British solution? Opium. Not as medicine, as a weapon. They've been growing opium in Bengal since 1773, vast poppy fields cultivated under company supervision. The plan is elegant and evil. Reverse the silver flow by creating millions of Chinese opium addicts who will drain China's wealth back to Britain. There's just one problem. The Chinese government knows opium is poison. The Qing dynasty has banned it repeatedly. In 1729, 1796, 1800, 1813. Chinese law makes opium trafficking punishable by death. So Britain needs middlemen. Merchants who will take the legal risk, handle the smuggling networks, and operate in the gray zone where British law pretends not to see. David Sassoon recognizes the opportunity of a lifetime. He speaks Arabic, Persian, Hindustani, and English. He has family connections across Middle Eastern and Indian trading networks. He understands both British colonial administration and Asian merchant culture. Most importantly, he has no moral qualms about what he's about to do. By 1830, the British trade imbalance with China is unsustainable. Britain imports massive quantities of tea, 23 million pounds annually, plus silk and porcelain. China wants almost nothing Britain produces. Traditional economics would suggest stop buying tea or produce something China wants. Instead, Britain chooses mass addiction. Here's how the system works. The British East India Company forces Indian farmers in Bengal to cultivate opium instead of food crops. The company purchases the raw opium at fixed prices so low that farmers have no negotiating power. The opium is processed at company factories in Patna and Benares into standardized bricks, weighed and stamped. Quality controlled. Industrial scale. Then comes the criminal genius. The British government auctions this opium to private merchants in Calcutta. Officially, the company's hands are clean. They're just selling a product at auction. What happens next? Not their concern. Private merchants, led by families like the Sassoons, buy the opium and smuggle it into China through a sophisticated network of fast ships, coastal distributors, and bribed officials. The profit margins are astronomical, 400% to 1,000% returns. This is not a case of they didn't know better. They absolutely knew. British law in the 1820s recognizes opium as dangerous and restricts its sale domestically. The Pharmacy Act regulates it as a controlled substance in Britain itself. So why is Britain flooding China with it? Because Chinese lives don't count. Commissioner Lin Zexu will later write directly to Queen Victoria, asking the devastating question, "Where is your conscience? You do not permit opium to harm your own country, but you choose to bring that harm to other countries, such as China. Why?" The British response: silence. Because the truth is too ugly to say out loud. We need China's silver, and Chinese addiction is the extraction method. David Sassoon doesn't just participate in the opium trade. He systematically dominates it through vertical integration that would make modern tech monopolists jealous. He establishes himself as the largest buyer at the Calcutta opium auctions. Between 1832 and 1864, Sassoon and Company purchases thousands of chests annually, each chest containing 140 pounds of pure opium. By 1850, his firm is handling nearly 70% of all British opium exports to China. He builds his own fleet. While competitors rent shipping space, Sassoon operates his own clipper ships, fast, purpose-built vessels designed to outrun Chinese naval patrols. He establishes warehouses and distribution centers in every major Chinese port: Canton, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tientsin, Hankow, Swatow, Ningpo, Fuzhou. This isn't random expansion. This is network dominance. He doesn't just ship bulk opium and hope someone else distributes it. He builds the entire downstream network. Coastal receiving ships serve as floating warehouses outside Chinese jurisdiction. Fast, scrambling dragons, small boats that run opium from ships to shore. On-the-ground distribution networks in Chinese cities. Relationships with local dealers, protection rackets, and corrupt officials. Here's where it gets brilliant and sinister. Sassoon uses opium profits to invest in textile mills in Bombay for legitimate exports to China, real estate across British India, banking operations through David Sassoon and Company. Bank founded in 1853, and insurance companies that insure his own opium shipments. This creates a business empire where drug money flows through legitimate channels so quickly that separating clean from dirty money becomes impossible. This is the masterstroke. Sassoon doesn't hide from the British government. He makes himself essential to it. He finances British military operations in India. He provides loans to the British administration. He develops Bombay's infrastructure, docks, warehouses, housing. He becomes the chief supplier to British forces in multiple colonial conflicts. By the 1850s, the British Empire cannot function in Asia without Sassoon money and Sassoon logistics. When you're that essential to power, power protects you. David Sassoon's operation moves approximately 3,200 tons of opium annually into China. That's 23 million individual doses per year. His personal fortune, built entirely on industrialized addiction, reaches the equivalent of $200 billion in today's money. And it's completely legal because Britain made it legal. By 1835, China has an estimated 2 million opium addicts. By 1850, it's 10 million. By 1880, it's 15 to 20 million, roughly 5% of the entire Chinese population. Let us put that in modern terms. That's the equivalent of creating 16 million American opioid addicts. The actual U.S. opioid crisis? About 2 million addicts at its peak. The Sassoon operation was 8 times larger than the Sackler crisis. This isn't abstract statistics. This is family destruction at industrial scale. Fathers smoking themselves into oblivion while their children starve. Entire villages collapsing into poverty as productive workers become non-functional addicts. Coastal cities turning into ghost towns of the economically destroyed. Chinese writer Yuan Mei describes it in 1850. The poison has penetrated from the cities to the countryside, from the wealthy to the poor. Whole families ruined. Sons selling their mothers. Husbands selling their wives. When the craving comes, nothing else matters. China's silver reserves, accumulated over centuries, drain out at catastrophic speed. Between 1820 and 1840, an estimated 100 million silver taels flow out of China to pay for opium. That's roughly 30% of China's total monetary supply. Imagine if 30% of all US dollars suddenly disappeared from the American economy. That's the economic collapse China experiences. Tax revenues collapse. Government salaries go unpaid. Infrastructure projects halt. The Qing dynasty's ability to govern disintegrates. And the money flows to Britain, to the Sassoons, to families who will use it to build libraries and museums. Commissioner Lin Zexu is appointed by the Qing Emperor in March 1839 with a clear mandate: stop the opium trade. He's 54 years old, incorruptible, and morally certain. He arrives in Canton and moves fast. Within weeks, he confiscates 20,000 chests of opium from British and American merchants. That's 1,400 tons, enough to supply 5 million addicts for a year. He destroys it publicly, mixing it with lime and dumping it into the ocean. He demands foreign merchants sign bonds promising never to traffic opium again, on penalty of death. His moral case is unassailable. You are poisoning our people for profit. It must stop. The British merchants, including Sassoon representatives, scream about property rights. Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston doesn't see a moral crisis. He sees a business opportunity. Britain declares war on China, not to defend British honor, not to protect British citizens, to protect drug dealers. The British war justification is Orwellian. China has violated principles of free trade. They free trade in question? The right to sell poison to addicts. British gunboats steamroll Chinese defenses. Modern rifled weapons versus outdated junks. It's not a war, it's a slaughter. China loses. The Treaty of Nanking in August 1842 forces China to pay 21 million silver dollars in reparations, paying Britain for the opium Lin Zexa destroyed, to cede Hong Kong to Britain permanently, to open 5 ports to British trade, and to limit tariffs on British goods. What the treaty doesn't mention explicitly, but everyone understands. Opium will flow even faster now. And it does. Within 5 years, opium imports double. But Britain wants more. China is still trying to resist opium through passive enforcement, turning a blind eye to treaty terms. So Britain invents another excuse, the Arrow Incident, a barely legitimate dispute over a ship's flag, and launches a second war in 1856. This time, France joins. The Anglo-French forces march to Beijing, burn the Summer Palace, one of humanity's greatest architectural treasures, and force China to sign the Treaty of Tientsin in 1858. This treaty is the final nail. Opium is now officially legal. Article 51 explicitly legalizes opium imports. China must allow British merchants to sell it freely. Any Chinese official who interferes faces British military retaliation. The crime is now the law. With legalization, the opium trade explodes. In 1858, opium imports reach 70,000 chests, nearly 10 million pounds. By 1880, that number climbs to 105,000 chests, 14.7 million pounds annually. The Sassoon family dominates this expansion. David's sons, Abdullah, Elias, Sassoon David, take over operations and scale even further. They open banks throughout China. They build textile factories. They invest in railroads. They construct the Shanghai infrastructure. And underneath all of it, opium money. Every hospital, every railroad line, every bank vault, built on industrialized addiction. Sound familiar? In the 1990s, American pharmaceutical companies convinced regulators that prescription opioids were safe for chronic pain. The FDA approved OxyContin in 1995 with minimal restrictions. Prescription opioid sales quadrupled between 1999 and 2011. Just like the Treaty of Tientsin legalized British opium in China, American medical policy legalized pharmaceutical opioids domestically. The playbook is identical. Create the product, suppress information about addiction risks, get government approval, scale distribution, profit during the crisis, deny responsibility. By 1860, the Sassoons are no longer just opium merchants. They're transforming into legitimate businessmen. David Sassoon and Sons invests opium profits into the Sassoon docks in Bombay, the largest docking facility in India. They build the Sassoon mills for textile manufacturing. They acquire real estate across Bombay, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. They expand their banking operations across Asia. By 1870, only 30% of Sassoon income comes directly from opium. The rest? Legitimate trade. But here's the con. All of it was seeded by drug money. David Sassoon becomes a generous philanthropist. He funds the David Sassoon Library in Bombay, which still stands today. He finances synagogues in Bombay and Shanghai. He builds hospitals and schools across India. He supports orphanages and poorhouses. His strategy is brilliant. Build institutions that benefit thousands, and those thousands will never question where the money came from. He's funding libraries with money from millions of destroyed Chinese lives. He's building hospitals with profits from a health crisis that killed more people than most wars. And it works. In 1853, David Sassoon is appointed Sheriff of Bombay. His son, Abdullah, is knighted by Queen Victoria, becoming Sir Albert Abdullah David Sassoon. Another son, Sir Edward Sassoon, becomes a British Member of Parliament. The family that built a fortune on mass addiction is now part of the British aristocracy. By the early 1900s, history begins rewriting itself. The Sassoons are described as merchant princes, as pioneers of Indo-Asian trade, as generous benefactors, as builders of modern Bombay. What disappears from the narrative? The opium. Museums, libraries, and universities funded by Sassoon money never mention that the money came from industrialized drug trafficking. The playbook works because by the time anyone questions where the money came from, it's been laundered through so many legitimate investments, so many hospitals, so many schools, so many jobs, that asking feels like attacking progress itself. Criticizing Sassoon money means criticizing the library where children learn to read, the hospital where patients are healed, the synagogue where families worship. The crime becomes invisible because the crime became infrastructure. The Sackler family didn't invent this strategy. They copied it. They created an addictive opioid called OxyContin. They suppressed research on addiction risks. They marketed aggressively to doctors. They scaled distribution nationwide. They profited $13 billion during the crisis. When lawsuits arrived, they diversified their wealth. They donated to museums, universities, and hospitals. They got their name on wings of institutions. The Sackler Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian. Sackler Schools of Medicine at Tufts and Tel Aviv University. By the time the opioid crisis became undeniable, Sackler money had already been laundered into respectability. When activists demanded institutions remove the Sackler name, many refused because that wing, that gallery, that scholarship fund serves real people. Attacking it feels like attacking the institution itself. But here's the difference. The Sacklers got caught. Public outrage forced museums to remove their names. Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy. The family faces lawsuits. The Sassoons never faced consequences. Their libraries still stand with their names in bronze. Their hospitals still treat patients under Sassoon-funded wings. History remembers them as philanthropists. If you think modern society learned from the Sassoon opium empire, look at pharmaceutical companies marketing addictive drugs to vulnerable populations at private equity, firms buying hospitals, and cutting care for profit at tobacco companies, shifting markets to developing nations at social media platforms, engineering addiction in children for engagement metrics. The lesson we learned wasn't, don't do this. The lesson was, do it bigger, scale faster, launder sooner. The Sassoon strategy succeeded because it followed a simple formula. Exploit a system powerful people already built. Make yourself essential to that power. Profit during the crisis. Diversify before accountability arrives. Use wealth to rewrite your story. Donate enough that questioning you feels like attacking progress. And if we're being honest, that playbook isn't ancient history. It's the business model of the 21st century. The names change. The drug changes. But the con is identical. And it's happening on an even larger scale. Because the lesson the powerful learned wasn't, don't build drug empires. It was, build them faster and launder the money before anyone notices. The Sassoons got knighthoods. What will today's architects of exploitation get?